Afternoon, Natalie.
Hi, Ranesh.
I feel like we've seen each other the entire day.
And the whole week.
I'm sure you are quite tired of me by now. So thanks for making time to talk to me in the afternoon. Although we did speak the entire day.
Yeah, I can't be tired of you, Ray.
I will frame that quotation and put it on a wall. Keep it that close to my heart. So this is our first Ask Me Anything, which is a little bit dangerous because I should have said Ask Me Anything about Agile, right? I realized that 10 minutes ago that it's a very open-ended question, but this is the first of hopefully many. We will see how it goes and how the responses look like. But yeah, so we've got a list of questions. I do know we have a hard stop at about half an hour's time, half an hour, 45 minutes time. So let's see how we go. And for anyone who's watching online, if you do have a question, you can pop it into the chat. We will try to get to those questions today. If we don't, we will save those questions for the next Ask Me Anything session. So that's hopefully how it works. So for today's session, we've got 5 questions, which we've had a fairly brief chat about, I guess. And I think it's more around what our experiences look like. So to get this ship rolling, the first question is probably the most interesting one, I think. And the question reads, how can I translate the theory into practice? And I'm fascinated to know your thoughts on this now. So I have some thoughts on this, obviously, but I am fascinated to know your thoughts.
So I was thinking about it a bit today, and so I think two parts, just thoughts off the bat, before some suggestions on how. Someone mentioned, and Ren, actually it may have even been you, but I can't remember, so I'm going to say someone, that theory will remain theory until you put it into practice, because often people express that the theory is beautiful, but what is realistic? And it's true. It's when you start putting things into practice that you really learn and really start to understand it. But how do you start translating this theory into practice? So the first thing that came to mind for me was understanding why that theory is there. So whether it be a practice or a principle, understanding the why behind it. Because if you don't understand the why, then you're never going to effectively be able to put it in practice or convince anyone to allow you to put it into practice. So I think the first thing is understanding why. And then depending on what it is that you're doing, and I'll mention why I said that just now, pick 1 to 2 things you want to test out.
Mm-hmm.
Not lots of things. Right? So especially if you've gone, like today, we've been training safe. That is a lot of stuff. So if it's just you, pick 1 or 2, maybe 3 things you want to test out. Do it properly. And then think, and then inspect on it and say, evaluate. Did it work? What didn't work? Reach out for assistance if you need, and then pick the next couple of things. If you're doing something like transforming a whole business unit, then I think asking for help would be a very good idea. Yeah, that would be my suggestion. It's like visualizing work with your team. Just make the work visible. Set up a board, pick some lanes, and start visualizing it, and then take it from there. That's my view.
I violently agree with your view. I think as an overarching statement, though, I would say if you are trying to implement the theory into practice, the first port of call is to move very carefully. Because fundamentally, you're dealing with a business and you're dealing with people and you're dealing with clients and customers. You're dealing with the existing set of processes, etc., etc. And there is a really good chance, or probability, I should rather say, that the existing processes and tools and techniques and people and ways of work and culture do not map to what Agile talks about, any of the frameworks. It doesn't map to it. And the gut instinct would be, well, we need to throw away all of the existing stuff and then bring in the new stuff. And that's wrong. Because if the existing stuff was completely wrong, you wouldn't be in business right now anyway. It would have failed a long time ago. So there are things you are doing currently that are working. So the statement around adopt the theory into practice or change the theory into practice carefully, it is exactly what you were saying, which is look at all the theory, understand what the theory is talking about, but then look at the context of the company and the people and the customers and the processes and everything else. Look at all that context and then figure out which pieces can be changed safely that might give us a better result. And if it doesn't, we don't break everything as well. So for me, that's like the underlying part is it's not a let's switch everything off, and then when we switch it all on again, it's all going to be agile, right? Or it's all going to be safe, or it's all going to be Kanban, or it's going to be whatever. That shouldn't be the intent or the ambition, my view.
Yeah, and I think you don't have to do anything fancy to understand it, but thinking about where the company's at via your understanding of the theory or the space or whatever it is that you're looking at changing, and that gap, because often that gap is so big. So then, exactly like you're saying, is picking the piece that something that you can influence at this current point in time that isn't going to be such a leap, and start with that. That's obviously going to make an impact. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, second question. How do we manage / introduce the change? And this is also a fascinating question.
Yeah. So it actually follows on quite nicely to what we've just been discussing. We have been part of a lot of big changes, and for lack of a better word, abrasive. And no matter how much change management you have around it, it will be abrasive. So something like Scrum, telling teams that they must use Scrum, right? Or SAFe, they are big changes. And they're fairly quick for a change of that size. We've been part of many of those. We're still part of many of those. And I think there have been incredible outcomes from them.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to choose, though, I would go with an incremental and evolutionary change. And there's two reasons to it. Yes, it's slower. And yes, it is still going to challenge people. You do need to push people a little bit out of their comfort zone. You do. But you don't have to go to war.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. I think it's more sustainable and it's less violent, for lack of a better word. That would be my choice. But I think people want change and they want it fast. And that's why we.
So any initiative of adopting Agile or adopting Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or any of the frameworks, or actually, it wouldn't even matter what you were trying to adopt. Anything that's going to change the way people currently work is going to cause friction and conflict, right? By the nature of you are trying to change people from a comfort zone to a non-comfortable place. You, as the person leading the change or championing the change, in your mind, you might have a view of what the better future looks like. But until somebody sees that better future, they don't always believe you or understand what the big picture is. I think that's where we have been very careful around the language. And the language is not change management is needed. It's agile enablement is needed if you're adopting Agile. Right? It's that whole process of, well, we need to first understand what do people know about Agile right now? What do we want them to know about Agile? And most importantly, once they've known it, how does adopting this new way going to benefit you as a person? So you as a tester, for argument's sake, you might be one tester in an organization of 15,000 people or 5,000 or 500, doesn't matter. But how does this adoption make your life better. Because if we don't go through that process, then by default, the reaction is going to be, it's going to be one of conflict, right? You're changing the way that I currently work. Why are you changing it? Are you trying to do something to me?
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to say that I don't know how are you trying to say I don't know how to do my job? And it's none of those things, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So in terms of introducing the change, it also goes back to the theory into practice part, right? You do not want to implement all of the change on day one. You can't do the big bang approach on day one. It has to be slow, incremental. It has to evolve. The organization and the people have to figure out what works for them in their context, and what's going to give them a better result than where they are currently.
And I think a key element to that is whether you are going for a bigger change or something that is slower and more incremental, communication is key. And as Lacan used to say, you need a case for change. So why are you wanting to do this? Are you doing it because it's a buzzword and everyone else is? Or are you doing it because you expect a certain outcome and you truly believe that this is going to help us get there? And you need to, in an authentic way, not words that everyone hears all the time, in an authentic way, communicate this to people and continuously communicate it to them and help them see what is in it for them. Otherwise, it's being done to them, not for or with them.
I think there's a bit of explanation in there as well, which I think is needed. In that, when I say, I'm not sure about you, I suspect you might violently agree with me as well. But when we talk about communication, we are not talking about send everybody an email, right? Or we're not going to send you an infographic and then take it for granted that you've read it. Like even for an email, if we send you an email, we aren't going to take it for granted that you've read the email, actually, because we don't know that for true. So change management, agile enablement, whichever word you want to use, whichever phrase you want to use, effectively, it's a lot more than having a spreadsheet and then following those steps on the spreadsheet without actually checking, is it making a difference? There's components of lean coffees and open spaces. There's components of master classes. There's components of formal training. There's components of informal training. There's components of one-on-one coaching discussions that have to happen to understand why a specific person doesn't know that.
And I mean, if we were in person, yes, finding how this would translate remotely, but that conversation in the corridor, it's all about talking, actually. And change is messy and it is uncomfortable. We just have to keep having those conversations. And something came to mind when you were speaking is it's not just about communicating that vision, right? And having these conversations. It's also about listening and hearing people's feedback. And it's one of the most difficult things. I say that because I struggle with it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most amazing leaders that I've worked with have been people that have had real conversations, two-way conversations. So whether you agree with the person or not, they have space to express their thoughts. And very often people don't need you to respond to that. They just need to know that you actually heard them. And it also gives you a lot of information as to what's happening on the ground.
So yesterday we had a conversation, not me and you, but a few other people and myself had a conversation. And one of the questions that came up was, what do we expect from leaders in terms of agile leadership? And apart from everything, the thing that clicked into place for me yesterday was we actually require authentic leadership. So as a leader, you might feel like you should know all the answers. But the people that report into you, or the people that work for you, or people that you oversee, they are fully aware that you don't have all the answers. And to be an authentic leader, you need to be able to say, I don't know the answer. Can we figure it out together? Or I don't know the answer. Let's try an experiment, and within a week, let's see what happens, and we might change course. So the importance of that is, especially from a change perspective, of an agile enablement perspective, is that if the message of why we want to adopt this new way of working is not portrayed in an authentic manner, people are going to pick that up. They're going to pick it up in your words. They're going to pick it up in your actions. They're going to pick it up in your behavior. And the moment that happens, you are not going to get the same level of buy-in, because people by default are going to be suspicious, because it comes across as though you've asked me to go down this pathway, but I sense that you are going to measure and reward me on a different pathway. So let me just follow the other pathway that I think you're going to measure me on, because I don't trust you as a leader. And that's an important piece there, I think.
And actions always speak louder than words. Like, I've realized a lot of people can speak really, really well, but when the rubber hits the road, do they respond in the same way or with the same message as what they were originally sending? And that, especially from leaders, is where change starts, is when you actually start living what you're speaking, and battling with it and failing with it. That's fine, but actually doing it.
Yeah. 100%. I violently agree with you. Right?
Yeah.
You find a synonym for violent just now. Just give me a second. I'll Google it. I think I've used it 4 times now. I'll find a synonym. So next, move on to the next question. The next one goes, what are the main differences between scaled agile and agile as we know it? And I'm assuming this person meant agile at a team level, so Scrum or Kanban, etc.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was also thinking, most of the time, people, I think, associate agile with Scrum, because Scrum was the most dominant for a very long time. I think it is still more dominant, but Kanban is coming to the party. So their purposes, I guess, are firstly a bit different. Scrum is very much focused at a team level, and was originally out there for a team developing a product. Okay, SAFe looks at multiple teams having to work together to deliver a solution or a product or a service, and they have to work together because it's big, complex systems and problems to solve. Okay, so they're solving slightly different problems. SAFe actually draws a lot from Scrum. So at a team level in SAFe, they majority promote Scrum. So you can choose Kanban or Scrum, but there are certain things you have to adhere to. And one of them is having basically a sprint. Okay, the roles are very 90-80% the same as Scrum. And then if you look at a program level, you can draw an almost direct comparison between each of the Scrum events and the program events, the program roles and the Scrum roles. The difference comes in, aside from the problem they're trying to solve, SAFe specifically or intentionally brings in Lean and DevOps as well in order to scale effectively. Scrum, there's no reason you can't use any of those practices or concepts associated with Lean or DevOps. They're just not explicit about it. So Scrum's quite a lightweight framework. Yeah, that would be what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. So for me, if I were to sort of simply answer the question of what's the difference between scaled agile or any scaling framework, I mean, this person specifically said scaled agile, but any scaling framework and what we would refer to a team level agility approach would effectively come down to supersizing, right? All we're trying to do is that if we are scaling up, we're supersizing the teams so that we can supersize what the outcome looks like as well. So if a team can deliver a product, if we supersize those teams into multiple teams, we should be able to supersize what the product looks like or the solution and service looks like as well. So for me, that's the ultimate aim, or the ultimate goal. It's not as easy as that though, because there's lots of complexities and constraints and issues in trying to supersize from a single agile team into multiple agile teams. But I don't think that's the big question in here. I think it's got to do with, do we require a large number of teams to work together on delivering a single solution or outcome to a customer? And if the answer is yes, then a scaling framework is needed. If the answer is no, then you don't need a scaling framework. So it's not a case of you always need a scaling framework because you're in a large corporate. It doesn't actually make sense. Right?
And maybe if you just reorganized your teams, you wouldn't have those dependencies.
Because if we look at the economics behind a scaled environment, it is an expensive exercise. And when I say expensive, I'm not just talking about getting to a scaled point. I'm talking about executing in a scaled point.
Yeah.
It's an expensive exercise. There's lots of overhead, there's lots of people involved, etc., etc. So whoever is deciding on, do we need to use SAFe for this, or not SAFe, do we need to use a scaling platform or a scaling approach for this particular initiative or not, has to also consider, if we use a scaling approach, we are accepting the increase in the resources needed, money, time, etc., and the people. And does that increase in that investment warrant what we're going to get out of it? Because if it doesn't, then you shouldn't be using that, right? So it's an interesting management question, I think. It didn't come across as a management question, but now that I think about it, it's a very interesting management question.
I think it's also difficult actually to answer, because we were chatting about it today. Getting everyone in a room to align and come up with an idea of what we think we can achieve in the next couple of months. The idea is to shorten the feedback loop, so we're saving time and therefore delivering more frequently, saving money, etc. Okay, but we don't have stats of what it was before. So in a way, it's also a difficult question to answer.
It is a difficult question to answer. I fully agree. So I think we're going to leave it there. I think we might have to have a separate discussion or a separate session just to unpack that into more detail, right? In terms of what makes up Agile as a team and what makes up Agile as teams of teams. So our fourth question is, and I'm going to read it the way it's been written: how to effectively assign resources in sprints. Now, I'm assuming that this was not meant intentfully to mean that people are nothing more than objects. It wasn't meant that way. It's just this person used the language that's available to them. That's as far as I can see it. And when they're talking about resources, they're talking about people. They're talking about the people that do the work. So let's reword it to how to effectively assign people in sprints.
So the short answer is we don't.
Or short answer should be we shouldn't.
Yeah. So my position is that it is more effective not to assign people. So there are two different ways that we use, but it's quite a different paradigm. So we're moving really from, if we're assigning work to people, we're pushing things on to people. Okay. So we move more to a pull, where we're very clear on what is the desired goal and the priority of items, and then the people pull based on the available capacity. So if you were in a Scrum team, if you were in a team that was using Scrum as an example, you as a team would have items that you've brought into your sprint, and you would then pull those one by one or two in the beginning, and then once you've completed one of those, you'd pull a next one, right? So no one tells who must work on what. The team figures it out amongst themselves. The other way that we do it is if you're using, say, a Kanban system, then we would have a WIP limit in the system, Okay, so say we could have 5 items running at a time, then we could pull another item, the highest priority item, based on once we have available capacity.
Mhm.
I think the other element that is quite important is that we need to enable our teams to understand how to optimize flow. So, for instance, we go into a sprint. If we start on all 5 stories at the same time, then we're not optimizing to deliver frequently. So it's not only about the team understanding what is highest priority and what we're trying to achieve, but also understanding what makes sense to pull next. So sometimes it is, and very often it is more valuable to help someone finish something than to start something new. So if we enable our teams to understand concepts like that, then they will self-organize to select what comes next. You don't need to assign. So less effort, same outcome.
Yeah, I think a secondary part of that question is, as a person who would lead a team, how, if possible, how would you match capacity and demand, or how would you match supply and demand, right? And assigning people to work actually doesn't do that for you, because you have to accept fundamentally, regardless of the organization, demand outstrips supply always. And there's nothing we can do about that. There will always be more things to do than the available capacity to do those things, right? If it was the other way around, we would have a problem, because then it means you have a lot of people who don't have anything to do, in which case that is a sign of a very badly run place, right? You've got a lot of people who are doing nothing. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that team members get to choose just the cool work, right? It's part of the accountability of the team, is that this team is now committed to doing these 10 things. And in those 10 things, there might be some cool stuff and there might be some not cool stuff. Regardless of who's doing it, it still has to get done. So you might get to do one cool thing and 2 uncool things in this sprint. And the next sprint, it might shift around. Or you might get to do, just a whole load of what we refer to as housekeeping kind of tasks, admin tasks for the sprint. But you've contributed value to the team and to the organization. In the next sprint, you might not be doing the housekeeping task. Somebody else is doing it. So it's a difficult one to answer again. And I think the answer lies in all of what we said now. It's not about assigning people to the work. It's about allowing them to self-assign the work for themselves. But it's also helping them understand that regardless of who does the work in the team, the work still has to get done. So if somebody doesn't want to do the work, it just means somebody else has to do the work within the team. So,
and I think, sorry, I think also matching the capacity and demand is, if you have an understanding of what this group of people, what their capacity is, so whether that be using velocity, whether that be using throughput, whether it be using things like average cycle times, whatever it may be, if rather focus on understanding that capacity and then selecting the most important items, just a whole lot less effort with the same outcome.
Yeah, and I think there's a catch there as well, right? Because there is a balancing act between motivating the team to achieve more versus influencing them to the point where they are overcommitting themselves.
And they achieve too little then.
Yeah, so maybe influencing is the wrong word. Maybe the word is, I don't know what the word is. It's probably another word for some influencing.
Pushing.
Maybe bullying the team, taking on more. And we've seen this in real practice. And the problem with that is, the moment the influencing or the over-influencing behavior becomes predominant, then teams lose the actual value of self-selection. And when you lose the value of self-selection, you also lose accountability at the team. Because effectively, the team can then turn around and say, we didn't choose the work. We were forced into choosing the work. So we don't really have to achieve it. So I think there is a balancing act there. I think there's also the angle of, if we if we overemphasize the use of things like story points and velocity, and I mean, I think we both share a very similar opinion on using those approaches. But I mean, this is common practice, right? It becomes the be all and end all. What happens is that we allow the teams and the systems to become prey to gamification, where we just start doubling story points for no reason other than we need to do more in a sprint. So by doubling the story points, you haven't done anything more. It's the same amount of work. You've just labeled it as more. Now, labeling something as more work doesn't make it more work. It's just labeling. I think there's a balancing act there as well. All right, so last question, and this question had me stumped for a while, actually. I was trying to think about this from different angles. And the question reads, how best to apply SAFe, or Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprises, how best to apply SAFe in a run team? So if people that are watching, and I might watch the video later on, a run team refers to business as usual teams. They take care of the daily keep the lights on kind of activities.
So I think my first thought would actually be to just assess the model of needing a run team. So, you know, the whole, like in banks, it's change the bank, run the bank kind of situation. So my first point would actually be, is this the best model for you? So if you're seeing quality issues and you're seeing animosity, then maybe don't even ask the question of how do you run this in SAFe, but maybe it's about moving that type of work, dispersing it across the teams. And that's not difficult to manage within SAFe, even though SAFe talks a lot about developing new solutions, not about running and maintaining them. But you build it, you own it as a popular concept, and for a reason. Yes, it is more difficult to manage the different work types within a team, but the accountability is also a lot higher, and often then the quality of work is. Also, it's more exciting generally to be part of teams developing new things, not teams just doing BAU. And when we do that, we keep a kind of a capacity pipeline, and each team would have a different percentage based on the amount of that kind of work they generally deal with. And they keep that open because it's not plannable. If you were still wanting to go ahead with having a run team, so my next question would be, how much of that work can be planned and how far in advance? Because if you're dealing with work that you cannot plan more than 2 weeks in advance, then I wouldn't bring that team in as a normal delivery team on an art, because they cannot plan. So, and then how dependent are they on the other teams within the Agile release train? Are they dependent or not? If they're not dependent, then they don't need to be running SAFe. And then we'd look more at a Kanban approach for them. I've also recently heard, and I'm interested to hear how it goes, of an Agile release train that has brought the run teams on board, but they play a slightly different role. So they're in something like the PI planning and in the various ceremonies to understand what they're eventually going to be taking over. And I guess also the bonus is you can keep an eye on the quality of what's being produced and that you will inherit. So it makes the transfer from building this new thing to it going into run mode into another team, it makes that knowledge transfer a lot smoother. And so I thought that was an interesting approach, and I'm keen to see how it plays out. Yeah, that would be my view.
That's a really interesting approach, actually. I like that approach. Makes a lot of sense to me. So very much what you said as well. The concept of a run team should firstly be challenged, because you shouldn't have all your team, or you shouldn't have a subset of your technology teams just focused on keeping the lights on. Everyone that's in that technology area are actually innovative people. So they should be given the opportunity to be innovative and contribute to new solutions. That being said, we still have to take care of run items, right? BAU items. So using something like Kanban or using even Scrum to some degree, it'll be important to include those items that we can foresee as business as usual or run items into the backlog, so that we can already carve out a capacity allocation to say, in the sprint, we're spending X amount of time on your BAU or your sort of run activities. But it's also then important to make sure that the team is fully aware that whatever they build today, they will be asked to support tomorrow. Because by doing that, intrinsically, it will change the behavior to say, well, I just need to build it to the point where it passes the test, and then you can move along. It's somebody else's problem. Because now, if you know that you are going to be looking after this thing tomorrow and for the next 6 months, 8 months, 10 years, the level of quality and care that you're going to put into that code is probably going to be a lot higher. And ultimately, that's just better quality code. So yeah, I think it's fantastic to try to include the actual run teams, if you have them within PI planning, integrate them into the overall process. But it's also important to try to transition away from having separate run teams to moving the activities of run into your sort of feature teams, if you want to use that word. With the goal eventually is to have as many teams as possible doing both feature work and run work at the same time or within the same sprints, right? You probably will always have some resemblance of a run team. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, especially within large corporates with legacy systems. That's not going to go away. But I think we can minimize the amount of handover there. And I think that including them in the PI planning process is a good way to try to minimize that handover. Sure. This was an interesting conversation. It's thought-provoking. I feel like I need to go and write some articles now.
I feel like we squirreled quite a few times.
What is a conversation?
But squirrels are the best.
What is a conversation about Agile if we don't end up squirreling? Exactly. Maybe we should plan a session that's just us squirreling with the rest of the team. I think, yes. All right. That's the end of the questions, Nat. We don't have anything in the chat, but we do have a list of questions that we still harvested and kept aside. So at the next one, we'll pick up the next set of 5 questions or so, and I'll probably add more questions as we go along. With that, thank you for your time, and I'm gonna release you 7 minutes earlier than the hard stop of 4:45.
Thanks, Rin. Thank you, Rin. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. We'll catch
you
tomorrow. Cheers.
Yep. Bye.